next is Mr. Labrador.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of the witnesses for being here today. Obviously, the issues being discussed here today are of vital importance to my district and the entire state of Idaho. Idaho, like many western states, has a vast wealth of natural resources, and a significant portion of those resources are found on federal land. So the issues being addressed today are particularly relevant to my district and to my state. Last year, Tripro Forest Products closed its mill in Orofino, Idaho. This mill closure put 40 people out of work. I think you mentioned, Mr. Lowry, how many jobs we can create. Well, actually closing the mill put 40 people out of work. These jobs were good jobs, jobs that allowed the employees to support their families. Tripro had purchased 3 to 4 million board feet of cedar from a salvage sale after the 2014 Johnson Bar fire. This timber would have kept the mill running for 6 months. However, prior to the timber being harvested, the sale was halted because of litigation. Tripro resource manager Mike Beck put it best when he said, quote, "It's not that there's a lack of resource, it's that it gets tied up in litigation," close quote. Unfortunately, what happened to Tripro is not uncommon in the West. Litigation and red tape are killing our rural communities that have depended on natural resources to support their economies. Julia Altimus, the executive vice president of the Montana Wood Products Association, was quoted in a story about a closure of a mill in Columbia Falls, Montana last year as saying, quote, "Given the short timber supply and the litigation mess, Weyerhaeuser had to make the decision they made, and it did not surprise me. It is unfortunate, and I hope it won't happen to other mills, but without significant changes in forest management, that is always a possibility. We're sitting in a wood basket, but we don't have access to the supply," close quote. Mr. Fite, I would like to talk to you for a moment about the closure of mills like the Orofino mill. How many mills have closed in the last 20 years?
I don't have the number at my fingertips, Congressman, but way too many have closed. I can tell you about Rough and Ready, which is another mill like Tripro. They were one of the only family wage employers in Cave Junction, Oregon. They're in the midst of a sea of federal timber, and they had to close last year, auctioned off their equipment because they could not get the timber supply from the federal forests that surround them.
So you would agree with the quote that it's not the lack of resources, it's the litigation and other issues that's preventing these timber mills from working and being effective?
I would. There's certainly the timber on the landscape.
Once the mills close, what impact does that have on the Forest Service's ability to manage the forest?
It's devastating, Congressman, because when you have a private infrastructure in place, those mills will pay the Forest Service for the saw timber, and they will conduct the needed active management activity. They will also support the rural communities with family wage jobs. But if those mills go away, the Forest Service actually has to go out and hire contractors to do things that the industry would pay the Forest Service for the privilege of doing. And it greatly hamstrings the Forest Service's ability to do really necessary forest management activity.
So we're not only destroying jobs, but we're making it more expensive to manage the forest.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay. Do we have enough timber in the forest to support industry and local economies while at the same time protecting these ecosystems?
We do, and there are a lot of strategies and reforms that can be undertaken that keep both of those needs into account, providing sustainable timber supply for our rural communities, but also ensuring that ecological priorities are observed.
Okay, is it Hallen?
Yes, Congressman.
What impact would a wildfire have in your watershed?
A wildfire impact on our watershed, which we're already witnessing, increased sediment loadings because of the loss of all the material on the forest floor. And so those sediment loadings essentially decrease your storage capacity in an arid state that requires and depends on water supply. And secondly, water quality, and we're seeing increases in the treatment of that water supply when it comes to increased loadings of organics, increased loadings of metals and other material. So those are two areas. And then lastly, the greatest threat to ecosystem management and those wildlife species within our forests is catastrophic wildfire today.
So can the restoration work that you described take place without an active timber industry with active mills and other infrastructure?
It cannot.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you.